Hey, everybody, welcome to the Canadian Job Search Podcast. My name is John Ribeiro, your host. And today we've got a very special guest by the name of Fawn Germer. She is the author of Coming Back, How to Win the Job You Want When You've Lost the Job You Need, which just went on sale in January of 2021. Germer is one of the nation's most popular leadership experts and global motivational speakers. She is a four-time Pulitzer Prize-nominated investigative journalist and is a best-selling author of 9 books, including the Oprah pick, Hard-Won Wisdom. Fawn, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here with you.
And, I'm so honored. You are the second international guest that we've had on the podcast. I typically, interview people from Canada, and it's so nice just to get a different perspective from those who are outside of the country, doing the same thing, helping candidates get into the workforce. And I know in your specialty, your case, you're helping women and empowering women to get into the workforce, which I think is a very timely topic.
Well, actually, this book is for men just as much as women. So my clients are male and female, but I'll take them all.
Yeah, excellent. And I'm so honored to have you here to help you to share some of the wisdom that you have with the audience. So, Fawn, let's just jump right into this. Given where we are today with this pandemic and the economic, I'm not going to call it an economic crisis, but it's a little bit challenging out there for candidates that are looking for a career. What would you say is different about today's job market?
Well, it's what we were talking about before we started. The competition is so fierce. There are so many people who are looking. But what has changed is our access to people who are decision makers. And there are ways to enter in through the side door. So you just have to be more strategic and clever and risk making a fool of yourself, because that's really the best way of breaking in.
Yeah. So that's good. And I want to dig into this topic just a little bit more. So getting into the side door, what does that look like? What would that, because I know that's one of those things that people talk about, and it's like, yes, you need to get to a decision maker, you got to get in through the side door. But what does that actually look like? What would be 1 or 2 strategies that you would share with somebody to do that?
Well, share that number that you just said, the 1,000 number.
Yeah. No, just before we got onto the podcast, I was telling Fawn that typically there are 1,000 candidates for every job posting that's out there. And in some cases, it's even higher. Where it used to be 200 or 300, but today is 1,000, and that's who you're competing against. So that is insane in terms of how you have to compete to get into a job market, into a role today, right?
So if your odds are 1 in 1,000, maybe it's better to find another way to enter. And I tell people, when you're not doing anything, go ahead and do those online applications, but really diving into LinkedIn much deeper and using it more strategically is a far better use of your time. And years ago, when I started as a leadership speaker, I would go to lunches and I would see top executives at the table saying to each other, hey, who do you know who can? And that was when I saw how the world really worked. And it really comes down to who you know. So for those of you who are job hunting and hitting the wall and getting frustrated, I'm reminded of a time when I was starting my career as an author and failing. I couldn't sell my book. I had left my job as a newspaper editor, and I was not going anywhere. It wasn't happening. Didn't know it was going to be a big bestseller, but that was perseverance. But at that time, I was broke. And I saw where the community college in the county where my parents lived was looking for a journalism professor. And I had every requirement. I had taught as a journalism professor for 12 years to both undergraduate and graduate students. And like John had said, I had 4 Pulitzer Prize nominations. I was a great breaking news reporter. I knew this job was made for me. Seriously, if you think about it, who would be better to teach young journalists than someone who had been teaching all along and doing it? And I never even got called for an interview. Now, what's significant here is I used to be a reporter, and I knew the public records law in Florida very well. And I thought, well, who did they look at? So I submitted a public records request to see who they actually interviewed. And they interviewed one person, and his only experience was that he had been the host of a radio show on Saturdays in Des Moines, Iowa. Now, I had written for the Washington Post, and they picked this guy without even talking to me. And I thought, well, how can this be? And I had a friend who worked at the college, and she said, oh, I'll ask around. And she says, yeah, he did some part-time work there for a number of years. They just posted it because they had to. It wasn't personal. And I think there are so many people out there who are hitting the walls and thinking that it's personal. It's not personal. It's not you being rejected. So you're in this mass and there are thousands of people applying, and you have to find your way through that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it comes down really, truly to who you know, who's going to get you past all of those barriers. And so a deep dive into LinkedIn is a big help. I write about this extensively in my book. And my book hits hard also on the hard to place categories of people who are middle-aged or people who've taken extended timeouts or long time unemployed. And what you do is you pick your dream companies, 10 companies you want to work for, and just start adding people from those companies into your contacts and comment on what they post, and do that for several weeks so they start to notice your name. And then at some point, send an in-mail message and comment further on something they posted. And then that's when the next time you say, hey, I've been watching a lot of your stuff. I'm really interested in your company. Could we do a Zoom and coffee? And it's amazing how many people will say yes, because people like to help other people, but they don't like to help desperate people. So if they've been seeing your name all along, they're a little familiar with who you are. And then you get on that Zoom and you make sure you're projecting the right image. I was just saying how I had a guy interview me a week ago, and you could see his basket of dirty laundry in the background, literally. That's what he was projecting. So really think about what you're projecting on these calls to show that you're professional, you're dressed up, you're game to go, and then make that person your friend. Don't act intimidated by other people. I had an advantage on that because I was a reporter for so many years, and we really didn't bow down to too many people. And when you relate to people as equals, even if they're not your equal, they know you respect them for their position, but you want to add them in your circle. And so you find things that you have in common as well. And it's a little harder on Zoom to say, hey, what kind of dog do you have? But if your dog barks, then you find, I always say it's important, if you're going to network with me, you have to know that I am a passionate kayaker and that I love living in Florida. I walk the beaches endlessly. I have a pit bull and 2 cats. I'm big into rescue. It's like these personal things that make me want to talk to you. And so that's what you do. You build a network of friends. And then the most important thing is when the time comes and there's a position you see, you write that person and say, hey, I need a personal favor. Use those exact words. I need a personal favor, because then they have to be either helpful or do the uncomfortable thing and say no. And you say exactly what you want. You don't say, can you circulate my resume? Because that usually doesn't help much. That's too easy on them. You say, there's this job, and you say what the job is. Can you personally connect me with this person and ask him to at least meet me on Zoom? Use your clout, call in the chit, because that's what leads to success.
Wow, there's so much great. I want to dig in here because there's so much great information. And you talk about going in for the ask, and the one thing I know, especially with my audience, we have a lot of people from Southeast Asia. We have people from cultures where that's not necessarily the most comfortable thing to do, right? Like it's just not, it's not one of those things you do, because depending on the organization that you worked for in the past, the hierarchy would dictate who you were allowed to speak to in terms of who in the organization, based on your position, who you can talk to next. So what would be one or two things? I know we're going off topic, and then we'll go back to our regular scheduled program and ask you the questions I want to ask you. But what would be the one thing from a confidence perspective that you would give, in terms of a tip to somebody to present that personality, that confidence a little bit more forward, even though they're not necessarily comfortable doing it?
Well, it's this. You are just as good as anybody else on this earth. You deserve success as much as anybody else on this earth. And what you say to yourself is way more important than what you're saying to other people. Because if you're saying the right things to yourself and you believe that you are strong, confident, and bold, you will be strong, confident, and bold. And I was thinking about your question with the Asian culture. I had the good fortune to do a speaking tour in China and Taiwan a number of years ago. And culturally, they are very, very different, but they're very warm people. And so just relate to people as human beings, understanding that you deserve your success. You don't have to cower to anyone. Sometimes you have to show people that you respect them. And I learned as a reporter, the one group of people you always had to use their title with was doctors. Doctors love hearing that word, doctor. And so it was kind of an inside joke with myself because I'd say to myself, I'm going to call this person doctor. Right. And the other one's okay. So governor, president, and mayor, you have to say
Okay.
governor, they like hearing that. And I would in my heart just kind of be laughing at it because I have this belief we are all human beings on this earth. And so if you make yourself confident in who you are and understand and believe you're as good as anybody else and as deserving, makes it a lot easier to talk to anyone else.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. No, and great point. I love that. It's really around how you see yourself, and if you
Yeah.
don't have that confidence before you get into that conversation, even as you're building out your network, you have to go in with. And one of the things I like to talk about is really going in with adding value back to that person, and then that's what I'm hearing
Yeah.
from what you're saying, Fawn, is really around you're constantly adding value back, and not going in, not sending one email or two emails and then asking or saying, hey, can you, I'm looking for a job, like not doing it that way, really building and taking that time to establish the rapport, to build that relationship. So when it does come time, like you said, to cash in your chit, it's going to be there for you. Those people are going to be responsive, people are going to assist, and people are going to get ready to get you into the workforce the way
Yeah.
the way you want to be in the workforce.
Or you
So,
do something else. There's something, okay, so here's one.
mhm.
And I'm not going to say who this involves, but it's somebody famous, and I'm setting up a podcast now. And so this is for an interview request. And it's very similar to what happens when you're building in your network. So this is someone that I have met over a lot of years. Okay. And so I want to get this person to feel like they want to help me quickly, even though they don't know me. So the headline or the subject line is, I literally almost lost my job the last time I interviewed you. And then I get in the email and I say, the first time I interviewed you, I was a 17-year-old reporter in Florida. The second time, I was working for the world's biggest misogynistic boss hole who hated what I wrote, told me it made him want to vomit, and demoted me from covering the legislature to covering positive Christmas stories because it was so offensive to him. Don't worry, it was all material for my second career as an author and speaker. And so you bet that got noticed, right? It's
Mhm.
funny. It's relatable. This is somebody that every person listening to this probably has heard this person. And I heard an immediate response. So that's also something you can do if you need to speed up the process. You have to reach in and make it worth their while so it can be creative. And you can do that. And notice I did use the word boss hole. That is not a swear word. Okay. So I don't want people thinking that they should cuss in their letters. Although if the person cusses all the time, I guess you could do that. But really think about what's it's going to take to be a joy for them to communicate with you, and then they will communicate.
Yeah. No, good points. And make it simple. And I liked how you added the fact of add some humor into it, right? We all think it's all business and we have to be all serious. But if you want to grab somebody's attention, remember you're competing with 1,000 other people for the same job. You have to
Right.
stand out somehow, right? And I love that. You made a really great point of using the word. I'm like boss hole.
Yeah,
I
right.
love it. It's a
That's a
great
great word.
term. It's it's kind of offensive, but not really offensive because it's not really a
You
word,
think
right?
it's supposed to be, but it's not.
Yeah, no, and that's
I
great.
didn't create that word, but boy, I use it all the time because everybody's had one.
So that's great. So I wanted to kind of dive in a little bit, and when I was reading through your profile, it mentioned that you said experience doesn't count anymore. Something else does. So what is that something else? Share with us. I'd love to hear it. And I'm sure our audience members would love to hear it as well.
Right. So when you say the word experience, I want you to think of this sound. Dum dum dun 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 dun. It's called the death of experience. It's insulting. It's frustrating. Everybody who hears this is going to be mad because you want others to respect you for what you've done. You've worked hard your whole career. They should acknowledge and respect it. But companies don't care anymore. What they want is to know that you're current and relevant. They don't care what you did in the past. They want to know what you're going to do in the future. So you really have to look at your skill set and be honest. You can't say I'm tech savvy if all your tech skills include, well, I can do Facebook and run my computer. You have to know what's happening in your industry. And that means you do the research and Google trends in the, let's say you're in insurance, you Google trends in the insurance industry and artificial intelligence and the insurance industry and blockchain and the insurance industry. Look at all these technologies and see how it's changing your industry so that you have something to converse about to show that you know as much as somebody who is a fresh graduate. The problem so many people have, and particularly once they are over 40, is they've got all of this experience. And because they've been there longer, they are getting salaries that are at the top of what the office is paying out. But a new hire from fresh from college will work for a half the cost or even a third and do 3 times as much. So you don't have to be a programmer, but you have to know what's coming and your role in that and how that's going to impact your job and your profession. And that means whether you are working or not right now, you're constantly taking these classes at places like edX.org and Coursera.org because those, they're called MOOCs, but those sites have free online learning taught to you from professors at Harvard and Yale and Stanford and Oxford, all over the world. The world's greatest institutions are involved with this. So you're taking Harvard classes and it's for free and it's all online. And it doesn't matter whether you pass or fail. You just want the information and it gives you something to talk about. So the first one I ever did was a class on innovation through MIT. Now, don't I sound smart because I took a class in innovation at MIT? And as I did it, I was getting all in that old student mode. And it's been a long time since I was a student. The first test was coming up and I was looking at stuff and I was getting a little nervous. And then it hit me. It doesn't matter if I get an A on this thing or I flunk. It truly doesn't matter. I don't need the credit. I'm not doing this for credit. I'm auditing this class. I need the knowledge. And so go get the knowledge and then sprinkle your conversations with things that you've learned in these classes to show that you're current, because relevance is so much more important than experience in this day and age.
No, absolutely. And I love that, it's not a pass or fail. And actually what we've seen as well, education only has a shelf life of 3 to 5 years. And then beyond that, it's really around what you know. And, if you're familiar with what's happening, blockchain is one of those words you keep hearing, it's in the news, it's everywhere, right? And if you don't understand even just like a percent or 2% of what blockchain is and what that means, especially for industries that you may be looking for work in, you're going to be at a disadvantage. Like you said, those new grads coming out, they're growing up with this. Like they know, they're picking this up in their classes, they're picking this up in conversation. This is very normal for them. And if you want to stay around, sorry, go ahead, Fawn.
Well, it's like I've talked about blockchain a lot on interviews since my book coming back. I have to promote that, right? Since that came out, and my brother heard it, and he was watching with his wife, and he's like, "I didn't know what blockchain was." And here's why this is important. Blockchain totally confused me. I didn't understand it. I knew it was the science behind what drives cryptocurrency and supply chain, and I didn't understand what it was. So I started reading articles on it, and I still didn't understand it. So I went to my old standby. When something completely befuddles me, what do we do as a society? We go to YouTube. So I looked at some YouTube videos. I still couldn't understand blockchain. And then I saw a YouTube video that said, how to teach blockchain to a 5-year-old. And it was a 4-minute video. And then I got it. And like I said, you don't have to be a programmer. So sometimes if you start with that kind of a video and then ratchet it up a little so you get an understanding of the concept, so you can see how it's going to impact your industry, you've done what you need to do.
No, a great point. And I love that. I'm going to go look for that on YouTube. How to teach blockchain to a 5-year-old.
Yep.
Yeah, but these are the things, right? And I think especially today, right? And what you're finding is organizations are downsizing, right sizing. They're looking at ways of becoming more efficient, especially in this world of pandemic, reduce sales. So they're just trying to, manage their teams so they get the work done, but they're also leveraging all this new technology. And somebody who is a veteran in their mid 40s, maybe hasn't done the courses, hasn't done, the education piece as much as they should have, throughout their careers. And you definitely don't want to be left out, because it's the one thing I hear is that there's a lot of ageism out there. People don't want to hire me because I'm older.
Well, okay. And that's where the book started, was I was going to do something on age discrimination, because I started seeing people in their 50s who were super talented and well-known, famous leaders getting pushed aside. And age discrimination is rampant. It is absolutely rampant. And I could have written that book, but the more important thing was, why is age discrimination so rampant now? And it's that people assume that if you're older, you're not relevant, right? They assume that you haven't kept up, that you're pretending you know what you're doing technologically, and that you're a has-been. Well, you can fix that by getting caught up and making sure people, and this is so important. You got to dress the part. You can't look like some frumpy old middle-aged, sloppy, belly over the belt guy and frumpy lady, right? I mean, it's like you can't fit into those old stereotypes of has-beens. You got to get your game on. And so you all know people who are older who are groovy as can be, right? Be one of those people and find a way to do that authentically. I'm learning. I started hearing these people I interviewed for my book. I talked to CEOs and senior executives and all these workplace experts, and I talked to 300 people for it. And when they would go off the record, these people who are looking at job applicants started telling me about physical appearance of people as they get beyond 40 and what mattered. And they would not let me identify them by age. And that was startling and upsetting. So I thought, especially, I kept hearing that word frumpy from them. And I went and I looked in the mirror and I thought, well, you're looking a little frumpy yourself, right? So I lost some weight, worked out, got a little tighter on that, and then got some really cool clothes. And the other thing is, if you're unemployed and you're looking and you need to up your game in your wardrobe, do what I did. I started looking at designer items on eBay. And I'm not saying the name of my secret designer, because everything I have is this person, but I get outfits for $30, and they're $500 outfits, and they're new. They're just 2 years from 2 years collections 2 years ago. So you got to up your game. You got to be the good looking, and if you're overweight, that is always a strike. And please don't hate me for saying that, because I have spent my life, I always say I'm great at losing weight because I'm even better at gaining it all back. So that is my thing. But there is a weight bias. I understand that, but there also is a way to look good if you're overweight, and you just have to make sure you're in that category.
Yeah. No, great point. Yeah, and I love how you said that. You're great at gaining it, but losing it, it ends up finding you. And I've actually switched the language around that, and it's like I'm releasing it. I'm not losing it anymore, because psychologically your mind's going to start looking for it. I'm just going to release it. And if
That's
you
for
release
sure.
something, it doesn't come back, right? So, no,
Yeah.
but great point. Great
This
point. It
package
doesn't,
right here. This
you
can
know,
make you
just
laugh. You can't see it. I've got a 5-pound fat replica that I leave on my desk. And it's so gross, people, let me tell you. But I keep it there because I remember, whether it's weight or anything else, this thing is huge. You'd say that looks like 10 pounds. It's 5 pounds, and that you can lose that in 3 weeks easily. And it's kind of like anything else. You just start and then you're halfway there. So
yeah. And I love, and typically I don't go into these type of conversations only because it can be very controversial, but I think it's very fair, right? You know, when it comes to your appearance, I think it's incredibly important to look professional. You have to look relevant. You have to look current, right? You can't be wearing a suit from 25 years ago and saying, yeah, I'm ready. And,
right.
you've got one of these big fat ties from the 70s. And it's like, oh my gosh, what are you doing?
Exactly. You got to have your
you
game.
yeah, because you look like you're out of touch, right? Like if you don't understand, I hear about TikTok, I know about TikTok, just those little things, right? And actually, this is one of those things I learned from Gary Vaynerchuk. Yeah, so just understanding what's out there, social media, like just learn, right? A lot of people don't even want to, I talk to people who, are in their 40s and 50s, and they're resistant to it. They automatically say, I don't know how to do that, so I'm not going to learn about it.
Right.
And
Well,
yeah,
here's a
and if you want,
general.
yeah, and if you want to be relevant in today's market, you have to know these things. You have to be current, and it doesn't mean you have to be, incredibly, like you said, you don't have to be incredibly. You don't have to know the depth of it, but you should understand it a little bit so you can speak to it. So we are getting close to the end, but I did want to ask you a question. And this is really around, and we talked about a lot of different things. So it's been fantastic. But the one thing I want to get in before we go is how do you stay resilient, right? Especially today, right? Like you keep getting all those no's. You know, from your perspective, Fawn, what would you recommend to people to stay resilient during this time?
Well, I wanted to make sure that a big chunk of coming back looked at what's happening inside of us, to our identities and to our feelings as we go through this. And so as I talk to all of you, I want you to remember this. What's happening is not personal. This is happening to millions of people. This does not define who you are. If it has hit your self-esteem, I understand, but don't let it. This is a moment in time. Truly, the odds of you eating out of a garbage pan and a pail and never getting hired again probably are 0. So you just have to keep in the game. And what happens, especially in a moment like this, is that people start talking to other people who are having trouble, reading headlines of negative things, and they assume there's no opportunity. You can look at a statistic that say you're competing against 1,000 people for every job and think there's no point in bothering. The people who lose are the ones who get frustrated, slow down, and give up. The people who win are the people who just take the next step and the next and the next. And I have famously walked in my previous book, my last book, it was about life reset. And I'm a big beach walker. And after my mom and dad died 2 months apart, and I had a big breakup, and then, I bought this move-in ready house, and it was a hole in the ground with my money. And it was just the worst year of my life. And I needed to do something. And I started walking the beach and went 7 to 13 miles a day. Well, I have bad feet. And at mile 7, my feet start screaming, and they scream, "Stop, stop." But I have learned that if I take the next step and the next and the next, even though it hurts, even though it's uncomfortable, I get where I need to go. And that's really the situation you're in, is that it is painful. It is uncomfortable. You want to give up. And that's when you lose. Just take the next step and the next and the next, and you'll get there.
Well, great point, Fawn. I love that. Just keep taking the next step because at some point you'll just get through it, and yeah, just take the next step. Something will, and I think you mentioned it. This will pass. Like you will get
Yeah.
to where you need to get to, as long as you keep trying, right? And I love that. I love that. So as
Absolutely.
we as we wrap up, Fawn, if people want to get a hold of you, if people want to learn about you, if people want to get a copy of your book, where can they go?
Okay, well, first, remember my book is called Coming Back: How to Win the Job You Want When You've Lost the Job You Need. Let's not forget that.
Yeah,
But
no, absolutely.
but I have sent John some links that you can get free downloads from me on how to recharge your career during COVID and taking the next step. And then also you can visit my website, which is fawngermer.com, and that's FAWNGERMER.com. And you can find the book everywhere. So it's a real moment for me because I know, and I have to tell you, I started this book years ago. And then as a professional speaker, like many of you, my career collapsed because of COVID, because there are no events. There are no big conventions. And then I have learned, because my first book came out the day before 9/11. Tour got canceled. And I learned there is opportunity in moments when everybody else is giving up. And I thought, well, I don't have a lot of speaking this year, but I have a book on how to get hired. And I got with my editor and I said, this needs a quick updating for COVID. And we did it. And it's perfect timing for that. So it's doing very well. It's been fun to do this.
Yeah. Thank you, Fawn. This interview has been fun. It's just been great to go through and pick at your brain and just kind of extract all that wisdom and knowledge and experience that you've had from over the years. So thank you for sharing that with my audience. I'm going to make sure I include the links that you provided me for those freebies. So for those listening, there are freebies. So make sure you take advantage of those. And I'll make sure to include the link to your website as well, Fawn. So thank you again for being on the podcast. And thank you for sharing all your wisdom with us.
Well, thank you. And everybody, don't give up. Just one more step, and then the next, and then the next.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening in to this episode of the Canadian Job Search Podcast. Wishing you all a great one. Talk to you all soon. Take care.